The topic that I was invited to talk about today is the Environment and Gender Index. I don't have a long career or experience on gender issues, and I was very pleased, but my background is on trying to help those people who develop composite indicators, and we will discuss what they are. You already had one example yesterday with the Gender Equality Index of the European Institute for Gender Equality. So try to help all those people who develop composite indicators to do the maths right. So the first topic that I worked on, and it was the Environment and Gender Index, was already picked up by the European Commission, and I would like to thank Elsa Concesa, who chose to include this in the Gender Summit of today. And I would also like to thank the organizers for the opportunity and the privilege to be here and give you a little bit of maybe a different air. So you will see that this actually presentation is the odd one out in this session. Although it discusses gender issues, it doesn't have to do with the physical differences between men and women, but rather the involvement of women in the environmental arena. So the title still fits, but context-wise it's slightly different. This is the you will find a few of these leaflets outside. This is the topic that I will be discussing on, the Environment and Gender Index. It was developed for the first time, launched in 2013 by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, one of the oldest organizations working on environmental issues. And the way the presentation today will talk a little bit about how important gender issues are, and they are covered in the international arena. Why we discuss the Environmental Gender Index, what is it particular about this index? We will discuss the framework, some key findings, why we consider it as a statistically sound tool in order to draw some policy messages, and then we will conclude. So if you Google, under Google News, gender, simply the word gender, no matter where you are situated, in Italy, in the US, Canada, you will get more than 600,000 pieces of news discussing gender issues. Now, I do consider this as a very important fact. What about gender issues in the academic literature? And I will take as a proxy the hits that we get on Scholar Google. Scholar Google contains information, documents written by the academic people and shared. So if you look on Scholar Google gender, you will see that until 1980, there were some 76,000 articles discussing gender issues. Now, of course, the very great peak that you see over the last years, it doesn't mean that gender became so much important all of a sudden. This pattern, you will see it on any word that you look for. It's simply because internet invaded our lives. However, you will see that nowadays there are more than almost 2,500,000 hits on gender issues. And out of these, if you simply Google gender index, you will see that there are roughly 2,000 articles discussing gender index issues. So based on some kind of mathematical combination of different indicators. And if here you include equality index or inequality index or equity index, because there are different ways that gender indices are, this can multiply by several times. So indeed, gender issues are at the international debate, academic debates, and so on. There are many composite indicators, many tools that combine different pieces of information together into indices. The Social Institutions and Gender Index of the OECD, the Global Gender Index, the Global Gender Gap Index of the World Economic Forum, the first one that we will discuss today, the Environment and Gender Index by the IUCN, the Gender Equality Index that you already saw yesterday, the Gender Inequality Index of the United Nations, and so forth. So there are quite a few indices around the world discussing gender issues. Now, do they all capture the same thing? No. They have different frameworks. Of course, somebody would expect that they point to the same direction, and as we will see, they do. However, if you look at the frameworks, each gender index looks into gender issues from a different perspective. So hopefully, most of the perspectives related to gender issues have been covered, but you never know. Maybe in the coming weeks or months, another gender index will pop up. So what is the, why do we discuss gender, the environment and gender index today? Because of course it links a lot to the environment. It is the first attempt of its kind to try to capture the involvement, the empowerment of women in the environmental arena, in environmental conventions, so related to women and sustainable development. And in fact, the idea is that gender equality and women's empowerment are indeed needed for sustainable development. That's why they try to put these things together. We will see that it is not an easy attempt. There are many problems with data. However, they have been also, it is a step forward. It is a way ahead to go. It was also nominated for the Caterva Awards in the gender equality category. Caterva Awards are considered quite important in their own fields. They have 8 different fields, I think. So it was quite important to realize that this type of measure was needed. And this is something that I got from the IUCN as information, that in response to the launch of the Environment and Gender Index, the ministers of 30 governments have requested support for improving their efforts on gender equality in the environmental arena. What does it mean? That in the end, this index somehow achieved its purpose, which is to bring attention to a certain issue. So how is it structured? You must have been already familiar with this type of indices. You already saw yesterday one. So the Environment and Gender Index framework has 6 main dimensions. Livelihood, gender-based rights and participation, ecosystem, gender-based education assets, governance, and country-reported activities. There are 6 categories, 27 indicators, and in 2013, it covers 72 countries. Now, this conceptual framework was built as a consensus or as a compromise between the suggestions offered by the various experts on gender, agriculture, education, and so forth, trying to figure out what is it that really helps gender equality and women's empowerment in the environmental arena, and what are the factors that prevent women from participating into these issues. The report that you can have a leaflet outside has this list of indicators. Several other indicators could not be included because of country coverage, of poor country coverage. However, they have already been identified, and maybe in the coming years they will be included. So there is a wealth of information. And if I read a little bit about what in the leaflet is written, is that there are 7 new data sets that they were developed by the team on how gender environment is addressed in country reports to the Rio Conventions and so on. So you will see that the team also made a very huge effort, not simply to gather existing information from international databases, but also to try to create new data sets, new pieces of information related to gender empowerment in the environmental arena. So what are some of the key findings of this index? That information about women's role and access in environment-related sectors is not collected and reported in many of the countries analyzed. So there is no information, no sex disaggregated data related to water, energy, marine, disasters, infrastructure, and so on. So this is a gap where probably international organizations collecting data need to work on. That although there are many global international agreements on gender and environment, the actual implementation of them is lacking in many of the countries analyzed, and that the global average for women's participation in intergovernmental negotiations on climate change, biodiversity, and desertification has peaked at 36%. So this is the best that has been reached over these last years. Some of the results of the Environment and Gender Index. On the horizontal axis, maybe I should go back just. So some of the key findings of the Environment and Gender Index on this graph, on the horizontal axis, you have the rank of countries from 1 to 72 on the Environment and Gender Index, and on the vertical axis, you have the Gender Inequality Index of the United Nations, one of the oldest ones. Before it was called Gender Empowerment Measure and so on, but now it is the Gender Inequality Index. So what you will see is that indeed there is a pattern, correct? You do see that there is a high association between the two, which is a confirmation that at least they point there is a similar trend. However, if you look either horizontally, so look horizontally between the 40 and the 50 rank in the Gender Inequality Index, and move horizontally, you'll see that the countries on the edgy rank receive ranks between 20 and 70. So you will see that although these two measures are relatively similar, they do capture different things. And somebody who wants to understand why one country maybe performs better on the Gender Inequality Index, but not on this index, should simply look at the underlying indicators and understand why this happens. How it correlates to the Environmental Performance Index of the Yale and Columbia University. Again, there is also a relatively high correlation. You'll see 50% of the variation on one measure, it's captured by the other, so they point to the same direction. How about the association with the GDP per capita? What you will see is that there is this very nice pattern that countries that have GDP below 20,000 per capita per year, they could reach up to 80 in the Environment and Gender Index. This is the score. However, what you will see is that there is a very, very high variation of countries' performance at the very high levels of the Environment and Gender Index, which means that now, there is no causal relationship in all these graphs, right? Simply an association between the two measures. But what it shows is that countries, it shouldn't be considered that countries that have a low GDP cannot have high environment and gender conditions or issues, right? Because you'll see that some of the countries reach close to 80 score, but they do have a low GDP. However, the other way around, we get that very high variations at the high levels of the Environment and Gender Index are associated to all levels of GDP practically. So this is a very interesting piece of information to further analyze. Now, the Environment and Gender Index does not simply provide a country rank or a country score, but there is a lot of information behind on how each country performs on the 6 underlying dimensions. It gives the regional rank, it gives the income rank based on the 5 income groups that they are considering, and also some additional country-level data that are not included in the development of the index. However, they are considered really important and relevant for the topic, and therefore are included as additional country-level data. So as we said, the index is just the appetizer. People do like talking about indices. In fact, when Mr. Droll this morning said that Europe is closing the gap to the US as far as innovation is concerned, he was using the Summer Innovation Index. So whenever people want to attract media attention, talk about holistic aspects that cannot be simplified or cannot be described with a single number, they resort to the composite indicators that have this feature. However, how can we argue that the Environment and Gender Index is a statistically sound tool in order to rely on it? And here I will have a short video.
The butterfly that flaps its wings in the Amazon rainforest and causes a hurricane in New Jersey visually encapsulates the complex world in which we live. Globalization has made Earth a small world. Frontiers are falling. Distances are collapsing. Countries that once existed quite separately now find themselves having to deal with each other. And so, new statistical measures are being devised. International agencies are asking for them to help make sense of the world's complexity and to take decisions that affect the lives of millions of people.
I guess it is surprising that some of the measures which we use to read our globalized world are developed here, near a little village on Lake Maggiore, and not in a skyscraper in New York. Composite indicators are indeed strange creatures, hybrid. But what does it mean exactly, a composite indicator?
Composite, made of various parts or elements. Indicator, a device providing specific information on the state or condition of something.
Imagine you want to measure the progress of a country in order to compare countries with one another. It's not sufficient to look at a single variable like the average income of a citizen. You may surely want to involve variables such as the quality of the health system, the quality of the education, the safety and security of the citizen, the respect for the environment, the quality of the institution, and maybe even other dimensions. In the last 20 years, there have been many attempts to describe those complex dimensions by boiling together a large amount of data and distilling them into a single number. You may have heard, for instance, of the Human Development Index, or of the Rule of Law Index, or of the Corruption Perception Index. At the Joint Research Center here in Ispra, we work on composite indicator since about 2002. We try to develop new methods, and we use some old methods. There are some key questions which we put when we build a composite indicator, and these are: is the composite indicator well built, well structured? Is it transparent? Is it reliable?
A composite indicator is a delicate mix. To explain you what our work is about and what makes it so exciting, imagine cooking. In a certain way, we too deal with fusion, so think of Japanese food. Ramen is a Japanese dish made of numerous ingredients, which they must be at the right quantities to make sure that the result is both tasty and attractively presented. So, rustling up a composite indicator is a bit like preparing a good ramen. Each constituent part must be in perfect balance. In a series of academic articles, 10 years of training seminars, and as many as over 60 real test cases, we, the team here at the JRC, have established methods for developing composite indicators that are useful tools to benchmark countries' performance and to monitor their progress over time. Aggregating data is part science, part craftsmanship, and it's a process which is complex, just like our world. It doesn't go out. Okay. You still have 2 more minutes of me, so just. But I cannot. How can I escape it?
The butterfly that flaps its wings in the Amazon rainforest and causes a hurricane in.
I'm trying to escape. But... Yeah. So I'll try to keep on anyway. While. So there is a lot of maths behind getting a composite indicator right. And really, this presentation also wanted to not only to offer some information of the Environment and Gender Index, but also to make you look more critically at these measures. Because if they're not well built, they can lead to any kind of confusion, misunderstanding, and wrong policy messages. So this presentation is not going to be at all technical. Just to tell you that behind the Environment and Gender Index, we did all the quality tests to make sure that they did the sums right. Just to tell you one of the examples, and this will help you a little bit understand the development of the index, the 6 dimensions that there are included, livelihood, ecosystem, and so on, the weights, probably you all know that the majority of the composite indicators is built like a weighted arithmetic average. There could be more complicated cases, but the weighted arithmetic average is the easiest one and easy to communicate to the audience. So the weights attached to these 6 dimensions, they are not all equal. You'll see that ecosystem and country reported activities receive a lower weight. Now, is it because these 2 aspects are less important? No. However, there were problems with the reliability of the data. In particular, also the ecosystem does not contain sex disaggregated data. So they were a very rough proxy of what they wanted to capture. And that's why they decided to assign a lower weight. Not because they are less important, but because for the time being, they are not as reliable as the others. And the country reported activities, the team at the IUCN went into a great effort to try to read hundreds of reports in English, in Arabic, in Spanish, trying to get the pieces of information that they needed. So given this rather exploratory nature of this category, the way it was built, they decided for the time being to assign it a lower weight. And what you will see on this column here, on the importance measures, this is something like the correlation coefficients that you saw in the previous graphs. So this means that 76% of the variation in the EDGE scores of the countries can be explained by livelihood, 80% by governance, 80% by gender, education, and assets, and then governance, and then gender rights and participation goes for 33%. So what you will see is that although the first, the third, the fourth, and the fifth one, they have equal weights, they do not really have exactly the same importance in the overall index. And there are numbers to tell you how to measure that. But just to tell you that the team wanted to be very transparent and wanted to be very conscious of the choices made. And how about the various choices that influenced the ranking? The impact of weights is not that influential. The impact of imputation, of estimating missing data, can be influential. But by far, the choice that really has to be discussed upon the various experts on the field is whether to use the weighted arithmetic average of the 6 dimensions or the weighted geometric average. I won't go into too many details now, I don't want to, but just to tell you that quite often in the development of composite indicators, people would always spend days on discussing the weights. It is experienced by far, but this should not be taken as a priori the most important choice. So before spending endlessly hours discussing which of the choices matters, you simply have to do some pieces of analysis, figure out what is it that matters in the development of your index, and then focus. So let's take for granted that everybody accepts that probably the best way to aggregate the data is to use the arithmetic average. And so this is what we would get. So this is the ranking that we would get by considering only the changes in the weights and the estimation of the missing data. You would see that it is quite robust, although for some countries, Burkina Faso, Jordan, Egypt, Benin, Algeria, and Syria, the thresholds, the upper and lower thresholds where you expect a country to perform can change. So for those countries, the EDGE rank should be taken cautiously. And again, this piece of information is really important because quite often people look at the rank as if it is the Bible. If a country is on the position 7, this is it. No, it should be seen always under the uncertainties that are involved in the development of a composite indicator. So, and I'm concluding now. So if we were to look for best practices on countries doing efforts to include women in the environmental arena, these are the countries that we would focus: Iceland, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and so on. You'll see that the way that the information has been aggregated, it's not leading to ranks that are unstable. They're very, very stable, and this is the interval for the scores. And again, if we were to look, if donors were to ask, but where should we allocate money to help countries empower women in the environmental arena, then it should be those countries, and you'll see again that their rank is not a symptom of the maths, but rather they're pretty stable, with the exception of Syria, for example, which is... Okay, so for the Syria, you don't really know where it is. So the conclusions, the developing team invited the GRC to delve into the properties of the index in order to make sure that they did the maths right. It is a statistically coherent tool. If you want more information, look at the information in there. And here are some related references on the topic. And just to tell you that if you want to know how to build composite indicators, there will be a training seminar in ISPRA from the 22nd to the 26th of September. And you will get more information here. So I have concluded now, and thank you for your attention and patience as well.